Hey guys, so I'm going to apologize in advance. This is my first time ever doing a voiceover. I have no idea if it's going to work out right or not, so just bear with me. But anyway, this is our capstone policy advocacy assignment. Um, yeah, so like I said, just bear with me. First time ever doing this. Hopefully it goes okay. Okay, so I have decided to do my PowerPoint over and project over the behavioral health unit at St. Clair, which is where I'm doing my practicum. Um, we service, of course, behavioral health, the mental health population. We see a lot of crisis issues. Crisis restabilization is one of our biggest things that we focus on. We also work hand in hand with suicide risk, addictions. We inadvertently get those on the unit as well. Most of the time, if they're struggling from psychosis, we will get them. Um, Same as like dementia. So we have a geriatric population as well. Um, and most of the time we have about half and half. So half of the unit, um, we have about half of a dementia population and half of the adult population. Um, and for this assignment, I interviewed my supervisor, John Walker. He is a certified social worker, and the unit supervisor, which is Melissa McKenzie. Okay, so like I was saying, the behavioral health unit, we serve a max of 20 patients. Um, we have, like I said, about half of the geriatric population and half of the adult population. We offer stabilization. They get a thorough evaluation while they're there. A treatment plan is developed and coordinated in a supportive environment. They have around the clock nursing care, and most of the time they typically stay for an average of 2 to 3 days. Of course, we get those that are there much longer, and some that come in and are out within 24 hours because they leave AMA as long as they're not a danger to themselves or others. Um, the mission of the hospital is to proclaim God's goodness through a healing ministry to the people of Eastern Kentucky. Um, St. Clair also offers multiple other health services, including inpatient mental and behavioral health unit. Um, the agency also provides outpatient, but we're not going to focus on that for this assignment. Okay, so some of the services that we provide, of course, I think we've hit on these a little bit and they're kind of common knowledge. So, more so what we have that may be different than other places. We have two social workers on the unit, and they basically run the group therapies and the assessments and all of those. We also have an activities therapist. She's amazing. She does a lot of fun activities that are also therapeutic in multiple ways. We have a designated discharge planner, um, which is great because only so much of the services they receive inpatient, it only goes so far if you're not planning for discharge. We have, of course, the nursing staff and the amazing supervisor, Melissa. So, the policies that affect the agency most are the ones that are agency focused. So, they're the ones that affect the patients the most. Of course, other policies affect them, but like I said, the most are the ones that are affected, are made and carried through by the unit. Um, so, to make those changes, Melissa helps to amend policies, and she pays close attention to how well they're working or how they could be better. She's very much hands-on. She um, she listens when people have complaints. She actually pays attention to the patient surveys, which I think is absolutely amazing. You don't get that everywhere. So John will have to refer to policies and procedures that apply to him daily, as well do the nurses and the other social workers and all of those things. Policies directly affect group sessions as well, which is kind of where we'll get to because that's the policy that I focused most on. Um, so right now, the policies that work well is the majority of them. Um, they have really got it down to a science. There's not much that does need to be changed, so I appreciate that. Um, the policy that I want to focus on, as I kind of mentioned before, I want to implement a split unit focus. I want to look at how we can convince the unit to split and have half geriatric side and half adult side. There's only so much variety of services that you can provide that will fit for both. So if we operated more on a split unit format where geriatrics received geriatric therapeutic help and adults received adult therapeutic help, I think we could have a more operable unit as a whole. So for this specific assignment, the target audience in order to implement a policy change would need to be the following people. We would need to focus primarily on the behavioral health staff or the hospital itself. Our hospital is a little different in that it is an agency inside of an agency. So the unit is actually contracted by Horizon Healthcare. So even though the unit is a living, breathing program inside of the St. Clair Hospital, it is actually some of the policies come from Horizon Healthcare, and those have to be implemented as well. So it's kind of like a balancing act to make sure everyone's satisfied and all of the policies are being followed as necessary. So the target audience for this would be, of course, the Horizon people that you would have to go through, but primarily the people on the unit. So that would be the VP of Patient Services, the Program Director of the unit, or Melissa, the VP of Clinical, and as well as the Nurse Manager for Behavioral Health. Okay, so the federal policy that led to acute care, which is what we focus on now on the unit, is the Mental Health Systems Act of 1980. It is actually the piece of legislation that more or less got rid of the long-term hospitalization or what were they called? Oh, insane asylums or those horrible places that you hear about all the time on TV or that you've heard about in history. So it was signed by Jimmy Carter, and it provided grants to the community mental health centers and diminished the need for long-term hospitalization. So our unit is a short-term facility, and we will then decide to make the decisions between if a patient requires acute or are better suited for long-term care. Most of the time, people can be treated in an acute setting and then with follow-up outpatient settings rather than the need for like Eastern State Hospital or more clinical long-term settings. I know this policy isn't exactly doesn't ultimately, I mean, it does ultimately affect it, but it's not a huge push into our unit. But this is the federal policy that I felt affected us the most. So that's why I chose to talk about it. Plus, it's kind of more heard of, and it's easier to relate to rather than some of the other ones that I found during my research. Okay, so the big picture. We talked about the federal policy that I'm going to look into, and that's the Mental Health Systems Act. The state policy that we're going to kind of discuss is Medicaid, or rather Kentucky Medicaid, and who they choose to approve for psychiatric stays and who they won't. Medicaid is a wonderful program for many people who can't afford insurance, or in other cases they are disabled or in different circumstances receive Medicaid. Either way, if they need the services, they need the services. So some of the limitations that are psychiatric would be that the admissions for diagnostic purposes are covered only if the procedures cannot be performed on an outpatient basis. So unless it can be proven that they need to stay for to increase their psychiatric help, insurance won't approve it. So sometimes this can be tricky when trying to get someone approved that you know needs to stay if you're having a difficult time going through insurance. So here are some other limitations to the services. You have to be sure that you clearly document what you need. And let's see, physician's order has to be very specific to make sure that they're approved and can stay, and their insurance will cover the stay. Locally, the policies that affect us are, like I said, hospital policies and more so Horizon Health policies, which is the owner of the contract of the unit. Additionally, we also have to consider joint commission, which is which are more policies that we also have to follow. Okay, so even though the Mental Health Systems Act was a wonderful, wonderful thing, um, there are also going to be cons. So some pros were it helped clients out of institutions and asylums. They received less stigma with services. They were less restricted. People were using a more client-centered approach. It was more locally approved. They were approved for short-term care, outpatient care, and humane approaches. However, with this act, the funding primarily went to comp care centers or outpatient services. Unfortunately, it didn't really include short-term inpatient stays. I think it was trying to go away from inpatient as much as possible. And with the changes, um, short-term stays were kind of left out of that as well. Um, Either way, still a great act. So, okay, so continuing with state, we looked at Kentucky Medicaid, and that's absolutely the pro, is that it allows health care for more people. It allows us to be seen for anything and everything, almost. But the cons are that it's super picky for what it will cover. You're only allowed so many stays without proof that you're continuing the care. So they won't just take your word for it, or they can't, you have to prove it. And sometimes this is difficult to do. Oftentimes we'll have people who we believe will need the stays, but we know insurance won't cover it. And though we can't kick people out, we will keep them. We just won't be reimbursed for it. Or the patient will be billed and they likely can't pay that bill. So of course, more pros and cons with that. And of course, locally, hospital policies. So some of the pros are that patients receive adequate care. However, a lot of the hospital policies are not patient-centered. So due to the lack of policy requiring the unit to be split, the geriatric population often receives all the care and the adults often go unnoticed. So this is something that I hear a lot from patients while I'll do their exit surveys. That's been one of my duties as a practicum student, is to do the outpatient surveys, or as they go to discharge, their surveys about their time there. And we have a shortage of nurses as is, which will make the policy implementation hard, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So the con of right now having a combined unit is oftentimes the geriatric population needs more nursing care, which is fine. However, the adults feel left out if they go to ask for something, or they feel bad asking for it because they know that the nurses are already so bogged down with the additional needs of the geriatric population. So, some other cons with the way it is right now, adults and geriatrics attend the same group sessions. It is very difficult for a social worker or whoever is running the group to be able to be mindful to the needs of both the geriatric and the adult population while spending adequate time making sure everyone is okay. That has been a very hard thing to focus on, making sure that everyone feels like they're being heard, making sure that everything applies to most people in the room. Geriatrics do better with reminiscing exercises, and adults do better with other types of things. So if we could be more patient-centered, that would be a huge breakthrough. So we were to familiarize ourselves with a social problem, set the goal, and that's what I wanted to do with implementing that policy change of the split unit. The options, we talked about those. We also talked about the comparing merits for competing options, drafting proposals. This is how I would go about it. I would lay out to the target audience everything that I feel needs to be discussed. And then, of course, we would need to seek supporters or funders. Luckily, in this case, no funding would be necessary. So we wouldn't have to go through that process of finding the money to implement these changes. So that's a good thing on this part of a policy change. Um, so finally, making the key presentation, which is what this whole thing was about, was just ensuring that um, the policy change gets heard. We have told them what we want. This is why. This is how we're going to do it. Um, and we talked about a lot of the pros. We didn't really talk about a whole lot of the cons for the split unit. If the split unit was completed, we would have a very difficult time making sure that we had adequate staff. This is one of the probably the largest issue that would come about with this policy change, would also having to be finding how to get more employees and how to be able to make sure that we have the money to pay for them. So that's going to be some things that would have to be discussed with the policy change. Um, so unfortunately, the hospital does not have the means right now for the staff. So there would have to be other ways of finding how to complete this policy without um, hiring more staff. That would pose the biggest difficulty for this whole um, the whole presentation. Um, okay, the references. Like I said, I am so sorry if this was the worst presentation of your life. I've never done a voiceover before, so you can't really see me laughing or making my little snarky faces. So again, thank you so much for watching. I don't think I met the time limit, but I don't really have anything else to say. So this is where I would ask for questions. And since you can't ask them to me, just leave them in the comment section and I will get to those. Yeah, so just let me know if you have any questions. I will put um, some of the resources that I found that I thought were really helpful, as well as some of the Medicaid information. You could look and see what they'll approve and what they won't, as well as just some other interesting tidbits about mental health as a whole. So, like I said again, if you have any questions, I will be glad to answer them. I hope everyone has a great end of the semester, and I will see you guys later.